Mr. Speaker, I have here today the gentleman from Washington who is a member of the Rules Committee and who is a farmer himself, and I yield to him 5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I'd like to thank my colleague from Alabama, a member of the Rules Committee, as well as joining Mr. McGovern, who we share the Rules Committee assignment with. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the rule that we're considering, as well as the underlying legislation, both bills. But I'd like to specifically speak to H.R. 1599, which is, I believe, accurately labeled the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act. And I think also talk to the positive impacts that it will have on our nation's food supply. Many of you may know that prior to coming to Congress, I was the director of the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And shortly after my time at the WSDA, several groups in my home state of Washington proposed a ballot initiative, I-522, which would have required mandatory labeling of biotech food products or those using ingredients that had biotech ingredients, also as we referred to as GMOs. Now, I opposed I-522 for a couple of reasons, but mainly because of the impact that we could see it would have on our farmers and on our ranchers, our grocers, but more importantly, on our consumers, the families who are in the grocery stores making food decisions, who in the end would pay higher food prices as a result of this mandatory labeling law that was being considered. In our state, we have the Washington Research Council, and it conducted an independent study showing that mandatory food labeling of biotech ingredients would cost the average family at least, at a minimum, of $450 a year in increased food costs. And that's assuming that Washington was the only jurisdiction to create such a law. Now, if other states and other cities, other localities decided to, such as Seattle or New York or Boston or San Francisco or Oregon, followed suit and passed their own laws, food producers would face an incredible, unworkable patchwork of legal definitions of what a GMO is and how to label it. Can you only imagine a food producer having to print, say, 100 different labels for their product, depending on where it was destined, where it was to be sold? And the liability they would face if, for instance, a box of food labeled for Phoenix ended up in Las Vegas or Los Angeles or Salt Lake City. Many producers are considering stopping or have stopped selling products in the state of Vermont, the most recent state to adopt mandatory labeling standards, because of this increased cost, the uncertainty, and the liability that separate labels would, by separate jurisdictions, would create. So, Mr. Speaker, in my estimation, and what the people of my state have said, is what we need is a national voluntary label, much like organic. The label which gives consumers who want to purchase non-GMO foods the freedom to do so, but will not impose higher costs on producers or consumers. So, Mr. Speaker, critics of this bill, H.R. 1599, unfairly claim it will limit the ability of consumers to know what they're purchasing. But let me say that that just simply is not the case. It's not true. If you go into a grocery store and want to purchase an organic product, that's something that you're easily able to do. And that's exactly what this bill will do for GMO foods. It will create a similar label. So make no mistake, if buying non-GMO is important to any of you as a consumer, then you will have every ability to do so when you walk into a grocery store and make your purchase. And you will have the confidence of the United States Department of Agriculture's system of making sure that those labels are consistent from one state to the other. So you'll know what you're buying by what that label says. Mr. Speaker, the founders of our nation gave Congress a tool in our Constitution to regulate interstate commerce to prevent the types of legal patchworks and market distortions that we're beginning to see on this issue. So I strongly urge my colleagues to support the rule, support H.R. 1599, and protect our nation's access to safe, affordable food. And thank you, and I yield back to the gentleman from Alabama.